All right, I'm happy to start whenever you all feel ready.
Okay, I'm ready. Is everyone else good? Okay, perfect. I think we're good.
Okay, I'm going off camera and I will mute. Have fun.
Thank you. All right, so I see some people are joining. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. But in the meantime, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, please feel free to do so. So if you're a student, a postdoc, grad student, faculty, and also maybe what you're interested in, especially about Cultivated. All right. Okay, I think we can start. So, hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the Johns Hopkins Alternative Protein Project's third virtual panel, All Things Cultivated. My name is Vivian Su and I'll be moderating today's discussion. So I am a first-year PhD student in the Material Science and Engineering department, and I'm also currently the group's co-director of education. Today, we're going to be discussing the science and regulations of the cultivated industry with the pioneers of the field. And there will also be a Q&A session from the audience towards the end. So please make sure to utilize that Q&A function in the Zoom. If you have anything else you want to add, please feel free to also use the chat feature and introduce yourselves as well. So before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce the organization for those who may have not heard of us before. And we're a chapter of the Alternative Protein Project of the Good Food Institute, which is a global community of scientists, engineers, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and writers who are disrupting the animal agriculture through education, research, and entrepreneurship. The Johns Hopkins chapter launched in the spring of 2021, and it includes undergrads, graduate students, postdocs, and faculty members. And we're really honored to be joined by our wonderful panelists today. So can everyone introduce yourself with your company, its product, your job role, and in just a few words, what cultivated foods mean to you and the future of food? So we can start off with Bianca.
Hi everyone, good morning. Really great to be here and thanks for having me. So I'm Bianca. I am from Mission Barns. We are a Series A startup in San Francisco, currently focused on producing cultivated fat. Right now we're focused on producing pork products, which is very exciting. My title is Technical Strategy and Growth Manager, which is definitely a made-up title, very typical in the startup world. But it just means I can do whatever I can to help scale the company fast and effectively. So do a lot of cool things in my role, from helping with fundraising, talent scouting, sustainability science, so currently working on a life cycle assessment, and many more things. And why I joined, I personally am a cell biologist, but also a huge foodie. I love food, cooking, eating food, but I'm very aware of the environmental impacts and animal welfare impacts of our current food system. So really passionate about this field for many reasons.
Thank you so much. And Natalie?
Sure. Hi, Natalie Rubio, and I'm at ARC Biotech. We're based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we build bioreactors specifically for the cultured meat industry, and I lead our cell culture team here. Yeah, and what does cultivated foods mean to me? Really everything. It's been pretty much the center of my life for the past 10 years or so. And yeah, I just think it's the most interesting thing in the world, so fun to talk about and innovate around. Met a lot of my friends through this space. So yeah, it's definitely a big, important part of my life, and changes every year. So always exciting to see everything progress forward.
Thank you. And Heidi?
Hi, yeah, I'm Heidi Koya. I'm the Director of Product Development and Innovation at Matrix Food Technologies. And what we do here is create and engineer customizable edible scaffolds to grow all the cells on for cultivated meat. And this will add texture, add additional surface area to grow cell mass in something like a bioreactor, and really enable the field to grow. So all these great companies that are working on cultivated meat products and specific cell lines to address the different needs in the field. We hope to be that supporting effort behind them to provide that edible animal component-free scaffold for these cells to grow. That comes in a number of varieties, microcarriers, and containing a number of plant proteins and different designs to promote cell attachment and growth. So it's a really great and interesting field. My background is in cell biology, biotechnology, so similar to many on this panel. And it really is interesting to me to see how efforts, I've done 3D culture and gene therapy and some cancer research, and kind of how all those different components still can help inform this growing field in so many ways. Just having all of this diversity of experience and roles just really bring knowledge from a number of fields into the cultivated meat world, from developmental biology, tissue engineering. It's been really great to interact with peers in this space. And that really keeps me motivated, because having a new technology means new problems. It also means new solutions. And working alongside of cutting edge innovators working on the bioreactors, the growth factors, the media, the cells, all these different components to come together into something that can really be meaningful and impactful to the world we live in is definitely motivating to me.
Yeah, I definitely love how interdisciplinary the field is. So that's something we'll touch a bit more on later. Brittany?
Yeah, hi everyone. Brittany Samble. I'm the VP of Operations at Biotech, and we're a Series B startup based out of San Francisco. And we are actually focused on seafood and currently working on salmon specifically, and readying our first product for launch, which will be a sashimi, sushi style product, and have lots of other exciting things in the pipeline. And I think I actually bring a little bit of a different perspective, talking about the different disciplines kind of coming together in this field. So my background is chemical engineering, but I've actually have spent most of my career in the CPG industry, in manufacturing and supply chain and operations. And so I couldn't agree more. It's so exciting to get to work side by side with cell biologists and all of these different disciplines to figure out how to bring this technology to life in a way that's accessible to people. And for me personally, I also just love food, and so that's actually what led me into CPG and my previous roles. But I also, I have 2 young daughters, and I think about both the food that they're eating, and we love to eat seafood in our family, but just thinking about the health aspects of that, and kind of some of the challenges we're facing with microplastics and mercury and other things that we don't want in our food that we can solve through this technology, and also just doing it in a way that takes care of our planet too. So yeah, super excited to be being able to apply engineering problem solving in this space.
Great, thank you. And Art?
Yeah, I don't know how much I can add to this incredible group of people. So I've been in this world not as long as Natalie, but I think I'm the elder millennial of this group, I think at this point. Eric Schulze, Vice President of Global Scientific and Regulatory Affairs at Upside Foods, formerly known as Memphis Meats. Upside Foods is the first cultivated meat company in the world, and also currently has the first and only safety green light from FDA for a cultivated meat product here in the U.S. I have started many of the divisions at Upside Foods, and currently lead our regulatory and government affairs. My former life, I worked at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration as a policymaker and regulator of novel foods and drugs, primarily in genetic engineering, and I have an interdisciplinary PhD in genetic, molecular, and cellular biology. I've also started the food design division here at Upside Foods. To my knowledge, it's the first sort of novel foods design product. So working from the genes up to a product. And at Upside Foods, we produce all commonly consumed food products, terrestrial animal, seafood, currently going to launch with chicken, but working on bovine, pork, and other seafood products. It's an exciting time to be in a new food space, new scientific fields. And like everyone here, everyone has a different reason. I'm here candidly because I want to absolve myself of my own guilt. I eat meat. I know how hard it is to stop eating meat, and I am very motivated to design products that I myself as a meat eater would eat over conventional products. So that keeps me incredibly motivated and excited to be here and alongside such talented people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so we're getting some more people in the audience. I just want to remind everyone to please introduce yourselves using the chat function. And if you have any questions for the panelists, we are going to have a live Q&A session towards the end. So please make sure to use that Q&A function in the Zoom. So moving on, I'd like to just start off with delving a little bit deeper into science. And to just maximize the amount of time that we have here, I'll be directing questions to some people, but everyone else is welcome to jump in and add in your thoughts. Does that sound good? All right, great. So Eric, I know you kind of just touched on about this, but can you go into how cultivated meat is made, starting with the banking of the cells to putting them in the bioreactor and then having a whole muscle tissue formed? And what's the timeline of this process?
Sure. And I welcome comments from my colleagues here. And for record, all of this is public information on FDA's website and how we do this, just for record. So it actually goes further back from banking and from choosing the right animal, the right genetics, to make delicious meat, you got to start from animals that produce delicious meat as a general rule of thumb. So selecting animals from samples of cells from an animal. In general, you want to take a very small sample, and that can be from a living animal, from an animal that is already intended for food. It can be from embryonic, it can be adult. It depends on company culture, ethical frameworks, and sort of how you want the age of the cells. Regardless, you want to choose those cells, and then you isolate them into your facility, and at which point then every company is going to have a version of cell characterization to create a cell line or cell lines from there, in which case they're characterized for their ability, how they grow, what types of products they produce, how they taste, and then of course their safety profile. Are they free of viruses, bacteria, fungi, all of those things that might render them unsafe for human consumption. Regardless, that leads to a banking process in which from there, the banking leads into production. It depends on the company, but in general, from isolation to banking, you're anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on how you're characterizing those products and the level of scrutiny you're putting around them, any level of quality control you have. Once you've banked it though, the process for most of us is going to be relatively swift, because at that point, that characterized cell can then be introduced into the production system, and from which case, this is where the sort of magic happens, and the benefits of this process really take over. Because without having to grow the bones, the nerves, any other part of the animal, you can focus all your energy at that cell, can put it all into growing the tissue or cells or what have you. In which case then, depending on the product you're producing, whether it be a single cell suspension or an actual tissue, you're looking at, once the process is up and running, anywhere from a few days till harvest of that tissue to a few weeks. Regardless though, no matter what product you're producing, that the cultivation process is usually significantly shorter than growing an actual animal. For context, a cow from birth to supermarket shelf is anywhere between 18 months to 3 years. My colleagues in here, we can be doing a cow's worth of meat, if you're doing such a species, in less than 2 weeks. So the idea, and then massively parallel scaling that effort is also what draws a lot of this too, in terms of the resources. I'm not sure my colleagues can add to this much more than I can, but that's the general process. Long process to get to cells in a bank, very short process from that point on, days to weeks in order to produce food.
Yeah, I'm definitely surprised it takes as little as a few days for it to cultivate. So that's really great to know. Does anyone else want to add on to that?
I'll jump in quickly. I think Eric nailed the process description. I think that's common across a lot of cultivated meat companies. So at Mission Barns, we differ slightly in that we are fat focused, and there are many reasons why we are. I'll explain two. So one, fat is where all the flavor is in meat. So we know that plant oils do not behave the same way that animal fats do in terms of texture, flavor, mouthfeel. And fat is also where the species-specific flavors come from. So a really critical component of meat. And so that is one reason. Another really cool reason, though, is that fat is much easier to grow compared to muscle. And we know that muscle tissue is a very complex tissue that requires quite difficult tissue engineering techniques. Whereas fat is very quick, cheap, and easy to grow. And so by combining delicious cultivated fat with plant proteins, it means we get the best of both worlds in terms of taste and cost. There's a lot of research that's already been done in functionalizing plant proteins to give you the texture that muscle fibers would otherwise provide in meat. And so, yeah, it's just a really, in my opinion, cool approach to allow us to scale faster and create products at a price point and at a taste point that consumers will love.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know there was also recently an article that reviewed Mission Barns bacon. So yeah, to the audience, there's a new article with the plant-based meat and also with the cultivated fats that Mission Barns produced. So I also wanted to ask about the scaffolding, and I'd like to ask this to Heidi. So how different would the scaffolds look like for cultivating meats versus fats?
They likely would look similar with different features and functions. So there are a number of different surface treatments, whether it's texture or a particular coating that promotes cell attachment, that can help use a similar, I guess, base microcarrier or scaffold for a number of different cell lines, depending on the surface treatment and preferred growth conditions. So whether it's adherent until the fat cells differentiate and release, or whether they're going to remain adherent in culture for like a muscle cell line, scaffolds do provide, or scaffolds and microcarriers provide that support, as it were, for these different cell lines in that way.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then just kind of going back to scaffolding. So I know that salmon is pretty unique in the way that it's still meaty, but it's also, there's so much fat to it. So I want to direct this question to Brittany or Heidi if you want to jump in as well. Is the process of creating cultivated salmon different from meats and fats? And also, is the scaffolding being used from another company, or is this made in-house?
Yeah, so the scaffolding for Biotech's product is made in-house. And so, we make that out of really great plant-based ingredients to build that scaffold and integrate the cells. And then that's where they can continue to proliferate and can be differentiated right into these fat and muscle tissues and bring those flavors, as Bianca mentioned. But yes, we're doing all of that in-house currently.
Great. So thank you all so much for your responses. And it just seems like we have a very good proof of concept that cultivated meat and fats and seafood does exist. And I think the question that a lot of people have is the proof of scalability. And so this is directed towards Natalie. Do you mind just telling us a bit more about what the industrial bioreactor looks like and what are the essential hardware and software components of a bioreactor for alternative protein use?
Yeah, for sure. So before joining ARC, I definitely was not aware of how big of a challenge the bioreactor problem is. I was working on the tissue engineering side. Everything was really small scale. I thought that, all these bioreactor systems already existed, and when companies were ready, they would just order one from an existing manufacturer. And when I started at ARC, and why I was really convinced to join was our founder really elucidating this problem and just conveying the fact that there just aren't enough bioreactors in the world to produce meat at a meaningful scale. Even if, we bought all the ones that we could, we wouldn't be able to supply meat demand. So first of all, we just don't have the supply. And then the bioreactors that do currently exist, they were designed for the pharmaceutical industry mainly, and they're designed for a different market. So they're very expensive. Pharma doesn't have the same cost constraints as the food industry, and it's just a different level of production capacity. They don't need to produce a lot, and it can cost a lot more. And food is really the opposite. It's a high volume, a low margin market. So we really need new solutions. When we talk about cost in cultured meat, we're usually talking about media, because if you do a cost of goods analysis, it's like the leading, it's like 90% whatever of cost, or at least it was before we started making progress in the industry, really dropping costs. So that was really a key focus for a long time, and still is, obviously. But even if you drop media costs to zero, if you use existing bioprocess technology, it still becomes cost prohibitive. So bioreactors is a huge area of focus. And basically, to address this problem, we need to make more bioreactors. They need to be a lot larger, and they need to be a lot cheaper, and they need to be designed specifically for animal cells and full tissues, rather than cells that are being used to produce proteins. And even for cell therapy, that's a little bit different. So yeah, big problem. And that's what ARC is founded to focus on. So for example, the largest reactor that exists today and used for animal cell culture is around like 25 or 30,000 liters. And to be able to produce meat at price parity, we're of the belief that we need reactors that are hundreds of thousands or even millions of liters in capacity each, as we really need to focus on scale.
Yeah, that's pretty big. And I just want to get a better idea of how that compares with the pharmaceutical one. So how big are the pharmaceutical bioreactors usually?
Yeah, so that's what I was referring to with like the 25,000 liters. I think the largest reactors that exist are for vaccine production in animal cells, and that's kind of where they max out.
Yeah.
This is interesting if I could jump in also with, like, for example, like Brittany's background. If I were jumping into this industry right now too, we're at a place where also supply chain background is super important for proving out this industry. Being able to establish, maintain raw materials. I mean, look at Apple. Their CEO came from the supply chain side. There's this, again, to scale, which is where this industry is going in general, like with Natalie's work, with Mission Barns doing dedicated fat production. There's a lot of white space in just being able to supply the raw materials to produce a finished food product, whether it be the actual production system itself, like we call them cultivators if they're used for food production, bioreactors if they're using for drugs, similar thing though, but then also the raw ingredients that are going into food products. So, but all of that requires something like, for example, that Brittany has, which is a supply chain background, which is super interesting. If you're thinking about it, just wanted to make sure I added that.
Yeah, that's
and thanks for that, Eric. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, to build on that a little bit, I agree, and also just bring that together with what Natalie was talking about with moving what has traditionally been a more pharma-based technology and figuring out how do we make that technology scalable in a cost-effective way for what we're doing and growing cells for food. The same thing applies, right, for the like the media components and inputs that many of those nutrients that our cells need to grow are ingredients that aren't generally used for some of these like amino acids and things like that we might use for our cells to grow, to be able to source those in a way that's priced in a way that makes sense for food, and just being able to scale that and think about just as we all continue to grow our production and availability of those inputs, and making sure that we're not creating any new challenges or problems unexpectedly, right, for some of the crops that support those inputs.
Yeah, and we're all competing for the same pool of amino acids, which are currently virtually monopolized by the pharmaceutical industry, paying pharmaceutical price margins. Natalie's point is like cannot be overstated. The cost restrictions on pharma are very different from food, and we are, as a cultivated industry, inserting ourselves into that world and that supply chain for trying to compete producing a food product. So definitely a challenge that anyone in this audience can solve. Please hit up any one of these companies. You will help us all.
Yeah, Brittany, thank you so much for bringing up that point actually about the risks that might be associated within the field. And so that's just something else I wanted to ask about. So there are some challenges, limitations, and regulations that we have to think about when making these products. And one of the questions is assessing the relative energy efficiency of technology compared to the greenhouse cost of animal agriculture. And so how are these, how can this be regulated, and how can we just mitigate the risks of other potential consequences from these tools and technologies?
I mean, I can jump into regulation since I wrote most of it. At least initially, even pre-Upside, I worked on writing the policy for, primarily novel foods, and primarily things that involve genetic engineering from animals and animal cells. So in the US, at least, has the most permissive regulatory framework in the world currently, in that it is very conducive to innovation in food and drugs. But specifically food. We don't have a novel foods framework here in the US. We regulate on risk. And the difference being is that just because a food is new or hasn't been produced before doesn't automatically render it in a separate category that has to be regulated effectively in quarantine. That's what a novel foods provision is. It's a quarantine until it's safe and then people can use it. It just assesses the risk of the product, just like any new food product. And that's I think the benefit of the US system. And so in general, cultivated products are regulated like any new food ingredient. Their risk is assessed objectively, and then the companies are asked to prove or show how they control, prevent, or otherwise monitor the risks in the system, just like any food product. Then that conclusion is passed along publicly, and then if you're producing meat or poultry, that decision is passed to the United States Department of Agriculture and regulates those things. If you're seafood, unless you're catfish, you stay with FDA. Again, then you're monitored just like any other food production facility. The rest of the world is quite different. They generally use versions of a novel foods framework, which are quite restrictive. And in the case of places like Europe, genetic engineering is almost nearly impossible to get through a regulation process. But that's just from the regulatory side challenges. I think in the US, that's why most companies are coming to the US for the regulation side. From production, I think I'll pause here. It's scale up. Like that is the game. The game is scale up. Prove this will work at scale. But I'll pause here and let my colleagues affirm or deny.
Yeah, I actually also wanted to ask, because I know Singapore is, I believe, the only country that has, cultivated meats that are available to consumers. And so I just wanted to ask, in terms of the regulatory side, how their process is different from America's.
They use a novel foods framework, and for 2 years since that approval, they've approved no other food product, despite receiving, from what we understand, tens of applications. So again, this process is cumbersome in general. Not that Singapore's process is cumbersome, but in general, novel foods frameworks are just much more restrictive, and you're much more limited in what you can produce, and you can't vary the process as much as you could in the US. There are pros and cons to that. Happy to debate that offline, but in general, if I'm starting a company, I'm going to the FDA and getting approval first, because for better or for worse, it is the gold standard for food safety and globally.
I could just chime in to answer one of the parts of your questions, Vivian, around how are we assessing the energy efficiency of our process. I'd actually also love to hear all the other panelists answer to this as well. There is a scientific methodology called a life cycle assessment that not only assesses energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions of a process, but also water usage and land usage and freshwater pollution. And we know that organizations like the Good Food Institute have published really, really interesting theoretical anticipatory LCAs to look at what cultivated meat production, once scaled, how that compares to conventional animal agriculture. And I think what's cool about being on the industry side is that we can use our existing data to assess this. And this is actually one of my favorite projects that I'm working on here at Mission Barns. But right now everyone's operating at a pilot scale, and so understanding what you will look like at commercial scale when you're producing hundreds of thousands of metric tons of meat for people is a really interesting question, and we're working with both our in-house engineers and external consultants to help us do this study. And yeah, really excited to be publishing the results soon. But yeah, I think this is just something that needs a lot more research in both the academic and private side. And yeah, would love to hear what everyone else has to say about this. And just quickly about your question around unintended consequences. I think it's actually less of a negative consequence or a challenge, but rather an opportunity is around all of the waste products that will be produced from this process. So the common metabolites from cell culture include, lactate. What are we going to do with all this lactate that gets produced when we're producing so much meat? And I actually think it's not a bug of the process, it's a feature that we can create all sorts of other products like cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, all these other things that we can use with the waste products that are generated from this area. So again, another big white space that we need more researchers involved in.
Thank you so much for adding that point. Yeah, I know cultivated is definitely not just limited to foods and to other industries as well. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Heidi, Natalie, Brittany, do you guys also want to jump in? I'd also love to learn more about the regulatory process for cell lines and for bioreactors as well. I'm sorry, cultivators. I think that's the better term for it.
Yeah, sure. I can jump in here. On the regulatory side, Biotech's actually been in conversations for quite some time with FDA to help with how to assess, from a regulatory standpoint, this industry. And so we've partnered with them, and I think that's been really helpful on both sides to be able to provide information to them to help inform how they're going to think about this industry. But I think I'll leave that area of expertise to Eric to build on anymore. But from a energy usage standpoint, I really love what Bianca and Mission Barns are working on with the LCA, because that's definitely the best tool that we have. And at Biotech, we haven't reached the point of doing an LCA yet. I think, as Bianca said, we're also operating at the pilot scale, but what we're doing right now is thinking about how do we design our first commercial production facility with these things in mind in order to minimize not only just total carbon footprint, but water usage especially. And so, we've been researching and considering is this LEED certification for this facility make sense? And, understanding what's really going to move the needle. And I think we're really just honing in on our process design and how we minimize water usage in that process design, and think about energy sources, things like, of course, wind, solar power. And actually, as part of our site selection through that process, we actually chose a geographic region that is aiming to be carbon neutral by 2030. So definitely front and center for us as we think about, building out our scaled facility.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I can add a little bit. I'm definitely not a regulatory expert. I'd say that, for equipment, our job is to ensure that we're designing equipment that helps, these cultured meat companies be compliant and receive approval. So a lot of that is, we think about contamination, making sure that our systems do a really good job at not allowing contamination and having good protections there. But yeah, I don't think really the equipment itself will be regulated. It'll be the process that the companies use it for. And yeah, we haven't gotten around to an LCA ourselves yet, but definitely in future plans for sure. I think that's so important to implement early in the process. But yeah, I think we just think about it in terms of just having the most efficient process so that just at the end of the day, you're consuming less inputs.
Yeah, Natalie, I also want to follow up on that. So, and also for Heidi as well, how are these tools being standardized? Because I know Wildtype, they have their own in-house cultivators, and then you guys are also producing cultivators. So as we further progress in this field, how can we just make sure they're all following a similar procedure?
That is the critical question, I guess, kind of like Eric had mentioned, there's only so many growth factors and everybody's going after them. But at the same time, demand also produces, innovation and scale. So I think having this entire field be constantly meeting these needs, addressing them as they come, and finding out creative solutions to scale up lower cost, ingredients is going to be critical. And also when you think of the resources used in the traditional meat industry, if some of those resources are diverted, obviously indirectly, I'm not a supply chain person, but the amount of resources that go into, killing 200,000 chickens a day, or whatever it is, that requires facilities, that requires personnel, that requires regulatory involvement, and then if there's no longer that demand, there's going to be other avenues for it, just as technology and demand creates these things. Like, and I think of newspaper boys on the street, we don't have those anymore. Like, we have a different way to distribute information, and it just comes with technology. It comes with doing things in a new and better and improved way, and then also, yeah, the demand will, I believe, push that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so, like Eric mentioned, Upside, or Memphis Meats, it used to be called, was the first cultivated company back in 2015. And so since then, there's been hundreds of companies who are, motivated to have the same goal. And my question now is just, how is this basic science being collaborated between the private and public sectors of the field? So this question's open to anyone.
Well, I think the most obvious answer is the regulatory framework and compliance. That the public sector itself includes the federal government and local authorities. But also, in part, all of us here participating in some version of working with academic institutions and nonprofit stakeholders as well to like, we need a pipeline. Like, all of us here came from a different field we are not cultivated people. Like, all of us here don't know what we're doing. And I mean that in the best way possible. That as a scientist, you have your whole point of strength comes from the fact that you don't know things. That is the best part of being a scientist. In fact, we get paid more money to not know more things. The less things you know in science, the more money someone will pay you. It's just in how you answer the question, I don't know. I'm being a bit reductionist, but the point still stands that we all came from something to build this place, and we're going to need people that know way more than us. And the best part of this is we only get to do that if we engage with the public sector on this particular thing. So from my standpoint, you can't beat education and, frankly, putting as much information as you can into the public sphere. And I think our colleagues and I have been doing a good job of that as much as we possibly can. But I'm interested, of course, this is just my position, but I'm curious what my colleagues think as well.
Yeah, definitely. Second, all of that. Super passionate about helping education for cell ag. I did my PhD at Tufts University, which is one of the academic leaders in this space, and still work a lot with them on building this pipeline and maybe developing like boot camps and just anything we can do to kind of get more people using their skills towards this space. And I guess I wanted to call out something that I found just really helpful from a GFI that kind of bridges the private and public sector are, for example, like the LCA and TEA that GFI put together. They took anonymous data from private companies, compiled that to do reports on the nonprofit side, and then people in academic and the public sector like look at those reports and innovate around the problems that those reports bring to light. And I just think that's such a beautiful example of bridging that gap, and it's something that's I've just seen over and over again be really impactful, even if, we don't have a high level of precision on those numbers. It still really helps, I think, everybody in the space, and just like bridges all the technologies and brings them together in one place. So that's something that I found particularly helpful.
I also wanted to give a shout out to New Harvest, who host a whole bunch of different conferences and events where I got to meet in person people like Natalie, David Kaplan, all these amazing researchers in the space, and allowing us to, network and actually lead to collaborations further down the track. So New Harvest do an awesome job at also bridging that gap. And another cool thing that we get to do at Mission Barns is hosting students on site and getting them to come do a tour, meet the team. We have like a whole bunch of different people who, dedicate an hour of their time to just have a meet and greet with the students and explain what they did to get into the field. So that's a really fun thing. And we hosted the All Protein project from UC Davis last year and actually hired someone from it, which was really cool. Another awesome thing about SF is that we're close to a lot of amazing talent, especially community colleges that are working on really hands-on biomanufacturing skills. And so really developing that relationship with our future workforce, not just from universities, but community colleges as well, has been a really fun part of my job. So if anyone's interested in coming to Mission Barns for a tour, and I'm sure these our other panelists would be happy to do that as well, please reach out to us. Like, we really want to get to know you and show you what working in the field is like.
Bianca, thank you so much. That is a wonderful segue into my next question. Brittany, I'm so sorry. I see that you're unmuted. I do just want to ask everyone here. So I know Mission Barns does the tours. So if any of us from, the Hopkins All Protein, I think we should make a trip. But yeah, how does your company help guide aspiring scientists, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and who are interested in this field? I know that some websites, they have like a pipeline part. So I believe Mission Barns has that. If you know what I'm talking about, it's like you're like, oh, what current stage of my professional career I am and like what I'm interested in. So I was just wondering for the others, what if your company provides something similar to that?
Yeah, so just building on Bianca's comments from before and in response to your question, Vivian, we do something very similar here at BioTech as far as helping, aspiring scientists who want to come into this field. We hired interns every year since we started. We also routinely host students, and we have a group coming in this evening for a visit, and our chef, our on-site sushi chef, who is a big part of our culinary kind of R&D team, is gonna prep something really amazing for them to taste with our product, which is exciting. And we love to just take folks on tours and share more about what we're doing here. So I want to extend that same invitation when you're in SF visiting Mission Barns, come swing by and see BioTech as well. And then as far as policymakers, similarly, we routinely host elected officials at all levels of government, including international, that are interested in the space. And so, we really love to take any opportunity to just help teach people about what we're doing and what cellular agriculture is, and what the promises for how it plays into the future of food. So so really exciting just things to get to do when you're in the middle of a lot of tough challenges during the day, to be able to kind of show people for the first time, what we're doing is always a really great experience.
Great, thank you so much. So we are coming almost to the end of the hour, so I'm going to look at the Q&A now. So we have a question. So one of them is, are any banked cells available commercially for industrial uses? Heidi, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. The bank cells available for commercial use, that's the question.
Yeah,
I know, actually, my favorite reference is the GFI database that kind of links all of us together. They have a whole list of the commercially available cell lines, and I can even shout out to Natalie, because I know the Tufts Lab macro cells are available there for to purchase, and they come with information regarding the cell growth and different things. So I would say definitely, shout out to to some of the members here and GFI itself for providing a pretty comprehensive list of cells. And it's always interesting, the number of customers that we get to interact with at Matrix Food Technologies, is across the world. And it's really exciting to see the different types of cells that customers are developing and banking for their use. There's just a variety, a lot of wonderful creative scientists and engineers behind these teams developing these cell banks. So yeah, I know it's important to understand the different usages of the cells and how they vary compared to some that are familiar to the pharmaceutical world. But yeah, it's nice to see that a lot of these less conventional but up and coming cell lines are available now.
I'll add, there's a super interesting question in there that hasn't been quite answered. Again, I bring this up because it's just I think a career avenue for some people here potentially. Who's going to clear these cell lines for safe and suitable for human consumption? We can buy them, but you have, at least in the US, no matter who's producing it, academic institution, in your home, whatever, food must be safe to consume. And so even if you're producing it early stage, you have to be, the safety compliance has to be in effect, even if you don't have a food approval technically. So will these databases of cells be cleared by the database holder, and then you are purchasing the safe and suitable cell line, or will the companies themselves be doing the safe and suitable evaluation? And I bring this up because it's just an interesting place where we don't have an answer yet because it's never been thought of. And I think there's an example of sort of how is this going to be done? Like to Natalie's point earlier about the cultivator systems, who will be certifying that these are safe and suitable for food use? Will the company be doing that? Will ARC be doing that? There's just interesting questions around who does the work for the CPG company. In the food industry, and Brittany could probably jump in on this, like often those certifications are done by your suppliers, and because it's expensive to do this and takes time. But again, I'm curious what Brittany thinks coming from the food world, how this is typically handled.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, typically, for certainly ingredients and equipment, the suppliers are providing letters of guarantee and, for compliance with FDA regulations, things like that. But of course, there is always still onus on the final food product, right? Especially my experience is mostly with ready-to-eat foods, right? And proving that those are safe for consumption does lie on the company producing it. So, in that world, it's definitely a combination of where that responsibility lies. And it is a really interesting question for, where we are with the cell-cultivated industry, and just thinking about equipment and ingredients, things like that. It is a little bit more of a question mark at the moment, and we're doing a lot of work internally here at BioTech to go through those exercises ourselves, but certainly happy to hand that over to suppliers in the future, if we can.
Yeah, and we have another question about the intellectual property issues. And so how does that affect, with the access and information sharing within the industry? So I guess this kind of goes back to our public and private sector question. So what are some potential solutions to any questions that might be covered by IP?
I can jump in here again too. I was actually just having a conversation with someone on our research team yesterday about this and academic partnerships. I think the team here at BioTech has also worked with Dave Kaplan and that group at Tufts, and we're actually actively looking for a partner for work on that the team is doing on Pacific bluefin tuna, because as I understand it, like the genome is sequenced but not well annotated, and the team wants to partner with an academic institution where those results can be published and be public, and those are things that we're always looking for partnerships on, and want to be able to share that information, because I think as we think about the impact of this industry, and I saw another question around just kind of how we scale it, really the companies that are represented by the panelists here, I think Natalie made a reference earlier, right? We use all the bioreactors in the world that exist today, and we won't even impact 1% of the existing global market for these products. And really the way we would drive real change is by showing what's possible and influencing, much larger producers to, go down this path as well. And so, I think that's certainly where, how we think about it, as far as really achieving this mission of producing a more sustainable food system with cell-cultivated products.
Great, thank you. And yeah, just kind of back to what we were talking about with other bodies such as GFI, New Harvest, and also with Food Frontier. So I'm particularly interested in the global collaborations within this space. And so I think this, yeah, Bianca, I do want to ask you, because I know Australia is one of the key players in the meat export business. So I just wanted to ask more about, I guess, the trade supply of alt protein from Australia to the rest of the APAC region.
I'm definitely not a trade expert, so not sure how much detail I can add there. Yeah, not too much I can add there, to be honest. But would love to hear from the other panelists if they know more about international trade.
We recently stood up an international regulatory affairs and government affairs division that I run, and have begun working with global partners in general. And I will say that the rest of the world, in terms of just sort of, there's a lot of interest, I think we all know, from other countries, given that there's over 100 companies almost on every continent. But in terms of how these products will be brought to market, regulated, which tends to be the first and last pillar, is less clear for most countries outside of, say, like Singapore. I think there's just in the UK, candidly, there's just a lot of variance in how these products are thought of culturally, how they will be brought to market. We're learning that there's a lot of interest in them, but there's just a lot of uncertainty in how to even bring them to market. And I know GFI has a contingents across the globe as well working on this. So this isn't an unknown issue. I just think, candidly, the US is going to lead because it's going to bring the most products to market, where we here will all be directly competing with each other on market against conventional products, plant-based alternatives. And there'll be this proof, this little crucible of like what survives. And I think a lot of countries are going to wait for that, candidly, unless they're willing to be the innovator. But I don't think anyone has stood out from our perspective in terms of that, but there are a lot of people interested.
Yeah, thank you. We've been getting multiple questions since we have audience from around different parts of the world. And so one of the most common questions that we're getting right now is the cultural and social implications of alt protein and just how they can be addressed to make sure that there's equitable access to everyone of different communities and regions. So Eric, I know you kind of just touched upon this, but is there anyone else who would like to add on to that?
Sure, I can add on to that too, just from interactions with the customers we've had supplying products, and understanding that Israel is actually a very strong market, and they are very well versed in the regulatory perspectives and attention to the requirements that are going to be necessary, including global trade. One of the companies I worked with has already mapped out all of the ports across the globe that they're going to plan to import their product to, and they're already producing a product that they can distribute. Of course, the regulatory individuals are aware that the naming conventions are important, and that they have to work hand in hand with the researchers, because it's definitely cyclic, where they don't know what they're regulating. They need information from the scientists need information from the regulators, so they know what it is that they can or need to make or need to regulate. So along with that, a number of Israeli companies are also doing the biobanking, understanding the toxicological impacts of various mutations in their cell lines, and whether that's something that is going to be advisable to move forward with. again, I don't want to call it individual companies because I don't, you know, I don't know it's appropriate for this kind of conversation, but you know, outside of Israel markets, there's other companies that, you know, are similarly understanding the regulators or the regulations that will be required, particularly related to cell lines. But yeah, similar to like what Eric said, there's also a number that are waiting for the FDA to make their move, and then, you know, ideally it'll just be a copy paste version, and and then it will kind of domino effect across the globe.
Yeah, and this is definitely a very exciting time. And again, Upside Foods recently received the FDA green light, and I understand you guys are moving through USDA right now. So really best of luck, and I hope to be able to see it on the shelf soon. So we are coming to the top of the hour, and I just wanted to ask if you can all share any piece of advice for the members of the audience here of how we could just further advance this industry, or what next steps they can take to better educate themselves and others on this topic.
Yeah, sure. I can start. One piece of advice I give to a lot of students specifically is if you're interested in getting involved in this space, try to find something specific that you really want to dive into. A lot of people ask me how to get involved and like, what do you want to do? And they're just like, oh, like anything cell ag, and that makes it hard to help you. So if there's, even if you don't know exactly what you want to do in 10 years, like pick something, whether that's, I don't know, like flavor analysis or like scale up just or consumer, like pick something that you're finding interesting right now and like dive really deep into that. And then when you talk to people and say that's what you're doing, they'll be like, oh, I know exactly who to connect you with. Here's like some really specific advice. So find something specific you want to focus on. That's my biggest piece of advice to students specifically. And then I just want to shout out that I'm desperately looking for a tissue engineer to join my team. So feel free to check out our careers page and apply, because I would love to work with people who are not just have the skills, but are really passionate about this field.
I totally agree with Natalie's first piece of advice. At Cellular Agriculture Australia, we're a non-profit organisation based in Australia, and we actually created a tool to help solve this problem. It's like a choose your own adventure interactive digital tool called Pathways into Cell Ag, and it essentially allows you to start either from you know, choose a problem to solve. So what area of cell ag challenges are you really interested in? Or alternatively, you can start with what is your major? So if you're a cell biologist or if you're a social scientist, what are the types of challenges someone with your expertise can solve? So that's a tool there that you can use. And just quickly, my piece of advice is I'm a huge advocate for a cold email and a hot coffee, which means send whoever you're interested in talking to a cold email, a LinkedIn DM. If you're reaching out to me, I'll absolutely respond to you, and let's get a virtual or in-person hot coffee to just chat about you know, how we can help and how you can get more involved into the space.
I'll add again. I found this industry from Reddit. I saw a Reddit post and was like, "What the hell is this?" And it didn't leave my mind. It kept tickling my brain. Like, how would you do it? I'm a genetic engineer, so I was like, how would I do that? Oh, they're gonna have regulatory issues. You know, like, oh, those are solvable. I agree with what's been said. In general, I think the easiest way to know if this is going to work for you is, are you just inherently curious? Like you just kind of can't, you just want to see how this would play out. Then, you know, an early stage cultivated company is right for you. There's tons of white space in this industry. Like, what do I mean by white space? Problems that haven't been identified yet that have a solution that could help. Like, do you want to work for a cultivated company? Do you want to work in supplying that company? Do you want to help fund those companies? Do you want to work for the government and regulate these? Like, there are so many opportunities. And I would say, again, to Natalie's point, like, you don't need to know what you like. Knowing what you don't know or what you don't like is way more important than knowing what you do. So go ahead and figure it out. It's okay to not like something. I don't like every aspect of my job, but I love most of it. And the only way to figure that out is by doing it. And being willing to pick up new skills. So I think in general, like, if you are fundamentally curious and are willing to, and you love the idea of solving a problem that is going to take your entire day's thinking, and you may make no progress, but you had fun figuring out why it didn't work, then this is a very interesting area for you to be in.
Yeah, that was all so well said. I think as far as how to get into the industry, I don't have much to add or how to think about it. I agree with Eric's point as I was just thinking about, all of the companies we interact with on, the supply side and trying to solve these problems for, so many different aspects of the process from a technical standpoint. So working with, bioreactor manufacturers like Natalie's company, or working with ingredient vendors and filtration companies and all these things, right? There's all of these opportunities, as Eric pointed out. And then also even just like you can contribute, even if you're interested in PR, right? Like we need to figure out how do we talk about this in a way that people can understand. And so the one other, not so much advice, but request I would have as far as how to drive the industry forward is also just helping teach other people about it. Because I do think that, this is an area that obviously is so new and so novel and not well understood that, we need ambassadors out there to help people understand what cellular agriculture is and how it plays into the future of food. So hopefully this has been educational and will help you do that as well. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you so much again, everyone. So we are at the conclusion of the event today, but I do want to give again a quick thank you to GFI, to Alt Protein Project, to everyone who put this together, and especially to the panelists. And so I hope you all have a great day. And this meeting is being recorded, so this will be posted on our YouTube. And thank you all so much for coming out. Hope to see you guys again soon. All right.